I'm Julie Spencer, author of the Buxton Peak series. This is Buxton Peak Book 1, Who is Ian Taylor? And I'm going to read Chapter 3 next. Playing back some of Chapter 2, I realized the accents that I was doing sounded terrible, so forgive me for that. Not very good at them. But anyway, I will do the best I can. Chapter 3 is called Communication and Lack Thereof. Can I get your email address? Ian's text read. I have too much to say and a text isn't long enough. She typed her email address into a text and hit send. Then she pulled up her email and didn't have to wait more than a few minutes. Megan, his text read. His email read. Megan, his email read. I won't be able to text or call for a few days because I'm going to get really busy traveling. However, I can probably email you a little. Do you ever think about me? I've been working on your song. I hope you like it. Email me back when you get a chance, okay? I'll try to answer your emails as often as I can. Ian. Hi, Ian. It's good to hear from you. Yes, I think of you. Probably too much. There isn't much to do up here except go to the beach across the street, which is suddenly a lot more appealing than it used to be. Summer is almost here, and people come up north. Yes, we use that phrase in Michigan. People come up north from the southern parts of Michigan to rent cottages and have campfires out by the water. I hope to meet some kids my age, so I'll be distracted from thinking about this mysterious guy from England who showed up a few days ago. What are you up to? Megan. Just hanging out and traveling with my mates. We're coming back to America in a couple of months. I think we're starting in California and working our way across your continent. We don't stay in one place for long, just passing through. If you really think about it philosophically, we're all just passing through this earth life, right? Passing through eternity. I'm glad I met you when I was just passing through. Life is more interesting with you in it. Ian. Ian, that's pretty deep philosophy. I'm glad to have met you too. Megan. Okay, that's the end of that section. I miss you and I want to see you. Are you able to video chat with me? She smiled at Ian's text. Sure. She hit send. Within seconds, her phone started vibrating. She answered his call. She answered his call and his handsome face was on the screen of her phone. I couldn't sleep, so I had to call you. Megan looked at her clock. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Not in Japan. It's 3 in the morning. What are you doing in Japan? Missing you, he smiled. Everyone else is asleep and I'm going a little stir-crazy. Want to see my hotel room? Sure, Megan laughed at him. I think it's one of the nicest I've ever stayed in. They spoil us here. He turned his phone around so she could see his surroundings. Ian, that is not a hotel room. It's like a presidential suite or something. Told you it was nice. He turned the phone around and grinned. Want to see my mates? I thought you said everyone's asleep. He ignored her and held the phone out so she could see him and the darkened room behind him. That's Kai. He pointed to a mound of blankets on the bed in the next room. Say hello to Megan, Kai. Shut up, Ian. A very sleepy British accent called from under the blankets. Go away, I'm trying to sleep. Ian grinned and held the phone closer as he walked away from the sleeping mound. Guess he doesn't want to talk right now. You'll have to meet him another time. Let's go say hello to Andy and Gary. She laughed at him as he crossed the room to another door and swung it open, bathing the darkened room in light. There was another mound of blankets on the bed and one on the floor. Ian zoomed in on the floor mound. Guess Gary passed out before he made it all the way to the bed. Ian laughed at his friend. Say hello to Megan, pals. There was no sound or movement from either mound of blankets. See why I'm so bored? He shook his head, looking into the camera. No one wants to talk to me. Ian, Megan scolded him. They're trying to sleep. Leave them alone. I guess I'm still on Megan time. What exactly is Megan time? She laughed at him. My watch is set to Eastern time, so no matter where I go, I always know what time it is in Megan's day. That is Megan time. You're adorable, Ian. She smiled at him. He yawned and she laughed. I think you should probably try to get some sleep. I'll dream of you, love. Ian flopped down on the sofa. You better. Good night. Good night. She turned off her phone and smiled. This was getting more and more complicated. Seeing you yesterday was amazing but horrible. Now I just want to see you again. You're so gorgeous. Where have you been all my life? Ian's text made Megan smile and blush. She'd never thought of herself as pretty. On the contrary, she was plain and geeky with straight long brown hair and never wore makeup or designer clothes. She shook her head and typed him back a quick message. And here I was just starting to believe you were not crazy. Megan's text read, I told you, he wrote back, I'm crazy for you. Have you finished my song yet? Not yet. I've been a little busy. Speaking of which, gotta go. That's the end of that section. An email came into her inbox later that day. She loved his emails because they were longer than his text and more detailed. This one did not disappoint. My herbal tea is way too hot. Sorry. Megan, my apologies for not being able to spend more time chatting with you earlier this afternoon. They were rushing me to get out the door so we could hop a jet. That's one thing that is not as much fun about traveling. You're limited by other people's schedules. Or British people would probably say schedules. In this case, airlines. Just finalized our plans for when we come back to America. It will be fun to be back there, but it will drive me crazy being so close to you and not being able to see you. Again, limited by other people's schedules. We'll be traveling in a motorhome across your country, and we're going to be visiting quite a few of your states. How many states have you visited? I want to hear all about your life. I wish I could hear your voice, but I'll settle for an email. Goodbye for now, Ian. Megan smiled and reread his email. She wished she had a more exciting life she could share with him, but in reality, she didn't get out of rural Michigan often. She decided he might as well find out now just how boring she was. And then he could let her down easier when he realized he'd rather be with a more interesting girl. Ian, her email read, my life is very dull compared to yours. The most exciting thing around here is when the local football team makes the state finals and gets to travel to Detroit to play at Ford Field. I went to Florida once for alternative spring break. So we drove through all the states between here and there, but I slept through a lot of them. I was really tired from doing some cleanup in a retirement community that had been devastated by a hurricane the summer before. Let's see, what else about me? I read a lot and I study a lot. Once I get back to college, I like to hang out with Rhonda, my suite mate, and our roommates, Jenny and Melissa. I like to go to the library. I grew up just a few miles from my college, Central Michigan University, and still have a lot of cousins and aunts and uncles nearby. A lot of them are farmers, but I never really got involved in farming. I'd rather be reading a book than riding horses or a tractor. I know, I'm a nerd. Anyway, enough about me. Tell me about you, Megan. Megan, I love Ford Field. That's not dull. I went there earlier this summer, right after I met you. We flew out of Detroit when we left for Asia. Detroit is beautiful at night. Have you ever seen the lights of the city? We have a lot of farming where I'm from as well. What is an alternative spring break? Ian, an alternative spring break is where you go for a fun location like Florida, but instead of partying like some people do, you do a cool service project. I don't really like Detroit. I'm not used to being around that many people. The reason my parents moved there is because my mom took a job teaching at Wayne State University. That's actually really close to Ford Field. I'm not sure my dad likes it there either. Rural Michigan is more his style, and mine. But he would follow my mom anywhere. That's true love, I guess. Where do you want to live when you settle down? Will you ever settle down? Megan, I don't know if I can settle down. I'll have to think about that. Gotta go for now. Ian. What on earth was she doing talking to a guy who would probably never make a commitment to her? Can't settle down? Megan felt confused and frustrated. It had only been 6 weeks, a few emails, a bunch of texts, and one very cool video chat. But she felt like she'd known Ian forever. However, if it wasn't going to last, why was she allowing herself to open her heart to him? She needed to find a way to stop this before it went any further. She decided to accept an invitation she'd gotten to attend a barbecue at a neighbor's cottage. There would probably be some cute guys there. Maybe she'd meet someone to distract her. Maybe. So, what are you studying at CMU? It was an old cliche pickup line, but Brad was cute, so Megan let it slide. He leaned against the side of the deck and looked at her sideways, as if he thought he was cool. His athletic physique and tan were attractive, and he looked like he spent a lot of time outdoors, and even more time in the gym. He wore a Western Michigan University sweatshirt, which meant he was a rival, but that made him somewhat exciting. Such a stark contrast to Ian, who wore hair gel and expensive clothes. She needed to stop thinking about him. Coming to this party was supposed to help her get her mind off Ian. Obviously, it wasn't working. She was going to have to try harder. Biochemistry, Megan answered. How about you? I assume you go to Western. She poked at his sweatshirt in what she hoped would come across as a flirtatious gesture. I'm undecided. He raised his chin and puffed out his chest. My football scholarship doesn't require me to take very complicated classes. They mostly just want me to keep up my eligibility so I can play. Oh, he's bragging about that? She wasn't sure how to react. That's great. Yeah, his smug attitude continued. Last year when we came to Mount Pleasant for Central Western weekend, I scored 12 of our 21 points against you guys. It was epic. Epic, Megan agreed with a smile, then decided to practice flirting a little more. She even batted her eyelashes a little. I'm sorry, I don't know much about football. You'll have to teach me. Just then her phone vibrated and she looked down and grinned as she read Ian's text. I'm so sore this morning from helping out with a neat service project yesterday in Manila. They were hit by a typhoon a few weeks ago and we helped clean up a little. Wish you were here with me. Are you still awake? Who's Ian? Brad inquired, looking over Megan's shoulder. She looked up and couldn't hide her smile, but tried to backtrack. Just a guy I know. She slipped her phone back in her pocket. You were saying? About football? It took Megan about half a minute to realize she had no interest in anything Brad was saying. Not only was it shallow and boring, but she couldn't help compare the fact that he was bragging about a sport where guys smashed their heads into one another for fun, while Ian was halfway across the world helping clean up a village in Philippines that had been ruined by a storm. She desperately wanted to text him back and ask him more about it, but resisted. He would chalk it up to it being late at night in Michigan and assume she was asleep. She decided to feign a yawn soon and excuse herself from the barbecue. Heading to Europe, Ian's text read. I'll have enough time to get to Buxton and see my mom and dad. Megan was busy with a new group of friends she'd met at church, so her text was short. Lucky, I've always wanted to go to Europe. Say hello to your mom for me. My mom wants to meet you, Ian wrote. I'll just hop on a jet and fly across the pond, Megan teased him. That would be great. When do you want to come? I was joking. Darn. My dad and brother and I went to Poole's Cavern, Ian's text read. Then we walked the ropes and ran the zip wire. Haven't had that much fun since I was a kid. I want to bring you here. I have no idea what you're talking about, Megan laughed. I'll email you. Remember, texts are not long enough for them. Megan, sorry, I forget we talk funny over here. Ian's email started. We have this really cool high ropes course where you feel like you're walking in the treetops. You would probably call the zip wire a zip line. Pools has this beautiful limestone caverns beneath the ground, but I also love to hike up to Solomon's Temple. It's a tower that was built in the 1800s at the top of Grin Hill. From there you can look across the high peak. On a nice day you can see for over 20 kilometers. I wish I could fly you across the pond and show it to you. Someday soon. Ian. Ian, that sounds so beautiful. I'll put it on my list of things to do someday. After I graduate, maybe? Megan. Hurry up and wait, Ian's text read. That's what my life feels like right now. What are you waiting for? Megan wrote back. Waiting to come to America so I can be with you. Excuse me, it says waiting to come home to America so I can be with you. Megan felt a sense of panic and excitement. Home, for Ian, was supposed to be in England, yet he had referred to America as home. The old cliche about home being where your heart is crept into her mind. Somewhere inside her, she felt like her heart was with him also. Although she'd been trying to distract herself, she had a feeling things were getting very serious between her and Ian. She wasn't sure how to respond to his text, so she just sat there staring at it. You still there? He asked. I'm still here. They're dragging me out of here. Gotta go. Bye. Bye. Layover in Chicago next week between London and San Diego. I couldn't stand being so close and not seeing you. I can only get away from my mates for less than a day. Can I come visit you? Megan smiled at Ian's text. It was almost the end of summer, and she'd be leaving her aunts to go back to school soon. She had yet to meet anyone who pulled her heart away from this mysterious British guy who'd kept texting and emailing her. She knew she was risking vulnerability if she let him come to visit, but she couldn't resist. I'll only be here through Friday, she reminded him. Will you make me a campfire on the beach? He asked. I've always wanted to have a campfire on the beach. That sounds awfully romantic. I'll bring Ed, he promised. He can be our chaperone. A week later, Ian showed up on a Wednesday afternoon wearing shades and a baseball cap. Megan instantly knew why no other guy had captured her attention over the summer. He threw his sunglasses and cap on the sofa, grabbed her in his arms, and just held her. She couldn't believe how good it was to be in his arms, how protected and secure she felt, and she'd forgotten how good he smelled. I've missed you so much. His whisper was sincere and desperate. This wasn't what Megan had expected. Where was the playful kid who traveled the world goofing off with his friends, sleeping in hotel rooms and motorhomes? Where was the boy who refused to settle down? She pulled back to look in his eyes and saw a man in front of her. Something had changed. Just then her aunt walked in and greeted Ian with a big hug. He winked at Megan, then gave his attention to Aunt Pat and helped her in the kitchen. He kept the conversation light and upbeat at dinner, but frequently smiled over at Megan. He didn't seem to have any desire to get out and enjoy the sunshine. Even when Megan suggested they go for a walk, Ian just shook his head and claimed it was rather crowded at the beach. His teasing eyes danced when he sat down next to Uncle Denny and challenged him to a game of cards. He patted the couch cushion next to her, inviting Megan to join them. She watched the clock impatiently, wondering when she'd finally get some of his undivided attention. He kept glancing over at her, occasionally winking or sharing a secret smile. It was as if he was trying to communicate that her patience would be rewarded. When the sun went down and the crowds had dispersed, Ian suggested they go make the campfire he'd requested. Megan was more than happy to comply. Although she had enjoyed the coolness of the cabin during the late afternoon sun, she was ready to get Ian away from her aunt and uncle. She wanted some time alone with him. Well, as alone as they could be with Ed following them everywhere. After a few minutes of gathering driftwood from the shoreline, they had a small roaring fire at the edge of the little park. Megan laid down a picnic blanket and hugged her knees to her chest with a peaceful sigh. Ian probably misread her wrapping her arms around herself, thinking she was cold, because he put his arms around her as if to warm her. She certainly wasn't going to complain. This was the most content she had felt in months. Even so, she wasn't prepared for his next question. Want to go to Europe with me next spring? No, Was he joking? They'd only known each other for less than 4 months and communicated mostly by text and email. I'm going back to college in a few days, and I still have 2 semesters to go. Next time, then. How often do you go to Europe? I live there, you know. His British accent reminded her of that every time he spoke, but she couldn't resist poking fun at his lifestyle. No, you don't, she jabbed him in his side. You live in motorhomes, hotels, and airplanes. I swear every time you text me you're in a different country. You and your friends are the biggest bunch of vagabonds I've ever known. How many vagabonds have you known in your life? His eyes teased her. Just you guys. She shook her head. You're awfully young to be able to afford to travel so much. You obviously don't have a job. Are you independently wealthy or something? Something like that. Ian looked away and pursed his lips. Ed snorted from the other side of the campfire as if he disagreed. Megan looked over at him, almost having forgotten she and Ian weren't alone. He talked with her as if they were, never really including Ed in the conversation. She decided to bring him out of his shell. What are you trying to say, Ed? She smiled over at him, hoping she could reach some sort of connection with Ian's best friend. Not saying anything. Ed grunted at her and looked out at the lake as if to imply he wasn't interested in having any conversation. He suddenly got up and walked over to the water's edge, reaching down into the rocky shoreline, and found a few good skipping stones. He tossed them across the moonlit water, skimming them perfectly as if he'd been practicing for years. What's his deal? Megan whispered. Why doesn't he like me? He's just not much of a talker. Then why do you hang out with him so much? Like I said when we first met, Ed has my back. I just wish I could at least have a conversation with him. Am I not interesting enough for you, love? Ian asked, moving closer to her on the picnic blanket. For a moment she couldn't concentrate on anything because his eyes were particularly mesmerizing as they reflected the light from the campfire. She almost couldn't remember what question he had asked her. Don't you want me to get to know your friends? She was trying to concentrate but failing miserably. You never bring anyone around except Ed, and he refuses to talk to me. Am I not interesting enough for you? He asked again. She tried not to fall for his charms, but it was too late. Will you stop that? She breathed heavier, realizing they'd both leaned closer to one another. They were inches away from their first kiss, and they both knew it. You're confusing me. You're confusing me too. Ian's free hand reached up to her cheek, and he brushed it with the backs of his fingers. Her heart began racing, and she felt like she couldn't breathe. Her eyes closed almost involuntarily as his hand laced into the hair at the nape of her neck. Their lips pressed together, and a shot of energy pulsed through her body. Megan had never felt passion like that before. She kissed him right back with as much hunger as she felt from him. His body next to her was the closest she'd ever been to a man. They were connected from the tips of their toes to their foreheads, held together by the tight grip of their arms. Ian pulled away from her slightly and looked into her eyes with an intensity that bordered on frustration. You are far too tempting for your own good. I'm sorry, Megan whispered back. His powerful, insistent kiss silenced any further conversation. She felt no desire to push him away, even as the small voice in the back of her head warned her she should. By that point, they were no longer sitting next to each other on the picnic blanket. Rather, they were lying in each other's arms. It was not an appropriate position to be in, and they both knew it. I shouldn't be doing this to you, Ian whispered between kisses. Or to me. Megan knew he was right, even as she hungrily reached for more. Ian's conscience finally overpowered his body, and he pushed himself up from the sand and called out to his friend. Ed, we're leaving, he demanded. Now. Ian's gruff voice frightened Megan a little, but not as much as the way her body had responded to his touch. She could barely breathe, and definitely couldn't sit up. Ian offered her his hand and immediately pulled her into an embrace. He wrapped his arms around her in a tight hug as tears began running down Megan's cheeks. Sorry, he whispered. I can't be here right now. I need to get away from you, immediately. She understood exactly why he was leaving, and she was glad he had as much willpower as he did. She stumbled in the sand as he pulled her along and back up to her aunt's house. He kissed her one more time, very gently, and got into the car. Megan watched Ed drive away with Ian in the passenger seat looking back at her, before rushing inside, through the dark house to her room where she threw herself down on the bed and sobbed. "I've never done that before," his text read. "You've never kissed a girl?" Megan texted back, still trying to dry her tears. "Not like that," Ian replied. "That was my first kiss." "Quite an amazing first kiss," he acknowledged. "Promise me it won't be the last." "I promise." After a few seconds, another text came through. "I think I'm in love with you." She felt flushed and panicked. She wasn't sure she was ready to say those 3 magic words, but she sure felt it. She needed to lighten the mood again in an attempt to keep herself from falling over the edge. It was getting more and more difficult. "I still say you're crazy. Have you finished my song yet?" "Almost. I can't wait for you to hear it." Something to look forward to. A chill ran down Megan's arm in spite of the warm evening. A nagging feeling chipped away at the back of her mind, so totally at odds with what she was feeling. It was as if something was trying to tell her this was the last day she would spend with her new boyfriend. And that's the end of chapter 3.